In this video tutorial, you'll learn how to make chain links with an antique impression die from Potter USA. This gorgeous chain link makes for a beautiful bracelet link, or you can use it as individual decorative elements in your jewelry. You can make them hinged or not, it's up to you. The first thing you're going to need is sheet metal. Here I'm using 14 gauge sterling silver sheet metal so that I'll have a nice, substantial, and hefty chain. I've divided my sheet metal out into small rectangles that are slightly larger than the design area on the impression die. And I'm going to use my jeweler's saw to cut up my sheet metal into those rectangles. After sawing out my pieces, I'm going to want to anneal them. Annealing them makes the metal soft and malleable so that it's easier to form into the impression die, which is necessary especially because of the thickness of the material that I'm using. So I'm just heating them to a dull red glow, and then I'll pickle and clean them and make sure they're nice and dry before I use them in my impression die. I'm placing my sheet metal, making sure it's centered over the design area on the die. And then I'm going to use a small piece of urethane to just get my metal seated in that impression. And you can see I have spacers here in the press to take up the space, and I'm making sure that the area I'm applying pressure to is centered. And I'm also using the die in conjunction with a tool steel pusher that's attached to my upper platen. So I'm using a small piece of urethane, moving it around, rotating the die so that I can get even pressure in all areas of the design. And that looks pretty good. It's not quite fully into the deepest part of the die. So after I've done an initial pressing on all my pieces of silver, I'm going to go ahead and anneal them again and then repress. Something that would make the metal even easier to form into the die would be to trim the excess metal off of each of these, not completely to the edge of the design, but leaving a small border. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can get away without having to trim them and just anneal them and press them again and see if I can get the full depth of the die. If you're struggling to get the full depth of the die, definitely trim around the edges of your design, but make sure you leave a border, like probably 1/8 of an inch of excess metal all around your design. And so you can see I'm just heating these until they reach that dull red glow before I move on to the next piece. And after they're all fully annealed, I will pickle them, clean them, and then again make sure they're fully dry before using them in my impression die. Okay, and then after they're pickled and cleaned, I'm ready to repress. So I'm just going to place my silver into the impression die, making sure it's correctly seated in the die. And I'm going to use small pieces of urethane and really apply pressure to the areas that didn't get as deep as I wanted them to. So I'm using this very small piece of urethane, pressing it into those deeper areas of the die. Okay, and then we'll check it out and see how it looks. And I think I can get just a little more depth, so I'm going to replace this small piece of urethane, and then I'm going to press a slightly larger piece of urethane on top of it to give it a little more urethane material to push down into those deepest areas of the die. And I think I'm pretty happy with that. And like I said, if you're not getting the depth that you want, try trimming your pieces. That helps a lot. And so I'm just going to repeat those steps on all of my silver pieces until they all are as deep as I want them to be. And then after I'm done pressing all of my pieces, I'm ready to cut away all the excess material. And generally it's a good idea to do the inner piercing before trimming off the excess material from the outside of your shape, just because this gives you more metal to hold on to. So do your interior cuts first and then cut away the outside material. And I'm just using a small drill bit here. Definitely make sure you use lubrication, and remember to go slow with your drill bits. When you use them at very high speeds, it creates a lot of friction, which creates heat, and it can actually dull your drill bits a lot faster. So if you use them at a lower speed, they will last longer and stay sharper. Okay, so I have drilled all of my pieces, and now I am ready to start piercing out the interior. So I'm going to just go ahead and thread my metal onto my saw blade. And then I'll go ahead and saw out the interior of each design before sawing out the outer perimeter. Okay, so I've got the bulk of the material sawed away. I need to clean up my edges a little bit, which I can do with a file, but remember you can also use your saw blade as a bit of a file. So you can just run it along the edge of the metal and it will act like a file because the teeth don't stick straight out. They're slightly offset from the center line of the blade. And so you can see here, just by running the blade along the edge, it's removing small filings of metal. And then once you're happy with the inside, go ahead and saw out the excess material from the outside of the shape. Okay, and then once they're all sawed out, you can see how they are going to fit together. So they're going to overlap here, and we just need to create the piece that's going to loop them together. You can see here I've got these mostly sanded and finished. You want to do all of your finishing before soldering anything on or before joining the links together. It's going to be a lot easier. And I think what I'm going to use for my little loops to connect these is this wire. This is 14 gauge sterling silver round wire. And I'm just going to use it to create a loop on the back side of these links, but I'm not going to keep it round. I'm going to flatten it because I think it will fit the little channel that's designed in the link better, and it will also lay flatter on the wrist if you're using it as a bracelet chain. So here I'm just taking that 14 gauge sterling silver wire and rolling it a little bit flat in the rolling mill. I'm not squishing it so it's super thin. I'm just kind of flattening it out here. I would say it's about, I didn't measure it, but it's probably about the same thickness as like 20 gauge metal. Okay, so here I've got this flat wire, and I am going to see how it's going to work in this little groove that's designed in this link. So I'm going to just make a little loop on the end of my wire here with my round nose pliers, and then see how it's going to allow this link to move. It fits really well. It's kind of a perfect fit here. As far as the width goes, it looks pretty good. So what I need to do is I think I'm going to just solder a straight piece of this at the pointed end of each of these heart-shaped links. And then as I connect them, I will bend it around into a loop. So I'm just cutting as many straight pieces of wire as I have links. This piece of wire that I'm cutting is obviously longer than I need it to be, but I'm not quite sure how long of a piece I need yet. And so this is what I'm doing. You could link two links together and figure out exactly how much material you need and then cut them all to length if you want to save on waste. And then just file one of the ends flat so that it's a nice fit for soldering. All right, and so now I'm setting these up for soldering, and I'm going to solder one of those flat wires to the pointed area on each of these links. So I've got my links here, and I'm just going to go ahead and add some flux. Remember, flux keeps your metal clean as you're heating. It absorbs the oxides that come as you heat the metal with a torch. And clean metal is necessary for solder to flow. So flux is your friend. I have a little more on here than I need, but it's just going to keep my metal clean and aid the solder in flowing. So don't be afraid to be generous with your flux. And then I'm going to set each of my wires in place, just kind of in the general location that they'll end up being, mostly just so they can heat as I heat the rest of the piece, and they can get some flux on them on the end that's going to solder to the point. And then I'll add just a teeny tiny bit more flux to each of these to make sure that the wire stays clean as I'm heating as well. Okay, so now I'm ready to start heating and soldering these wires in place. And the way I'm going to do this is I am actually going to flow a little piece of solder to the end of my wire first. So here I've picked up a small chip of solder on my, I have a small chip of solder here. I'm going to pick it up with my wire. So just making sure I've got some flux on there, pick up the solder chip, and then heat the wire until the solder on that wire flows. And then I'm going to place it where I want it on this link and just heat the link until the solder flows from the wire to the link and joins the two. I find that this way I get a cleaner join than if I try to hold these two pieces together and have a little chip of solder just next to the joint. I find I get a cleaner join this way. So that's the way I'm doing it, but you can do it however works best for you. And then again, I'm just going to repeat this process for all of these pieces. So picking up that little chip of solder with my wire, heating it until the solder flows, placing it on the link, and then heating the link until the solder joins the two. Okay, and then once I get all of my pieces soldered, pickled, and cleaned, I'm ready to figure out how these are going to join together. So now that you can see, the wire will insert down into the adjoining link, and then I need to figure out how to bend it over the back side and kind of create that loop that's going to connect each link to the one next to it. So I'm going to just figure this out with my round nose pliers, and I'm basically just bending it down, cutting off some of the excess for now. And then checking it against the other link and kind of seeing, determining visually how much material I'm going to need to make the size loop that I need so that my chain links will move freely and be flexible, but also that I'm not going to end up with these huge loops on the back that are going to make the chain sit weird on the body. So I don't want these loops sticking up any more than they have to on the back side of the bracelet. So figuring out the first one definitely takes more time, but once you figure out the best way to connect them and how things are fitting, it goes a lot easier and takes less time after the initial fitting. So I'm thinking this is looking pretty good. It's not quite as flexible as I would like it to be. I'm going to see what happens when I tighten this down. So it's not moving quite as freely as I would like it to. It's pretty loose, but with chain links, you really want a lot of flexible movement. You don't want pieces to get hung up weird when they move. You don't want anything to kink. So I need to figure out how to connect these in a way that they still maintain a lot of flexibility and like smooth, fluid movement. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a burr here in my flex shaft, and I'm going to clean up that little channel area that my flat wire is sitting in, and I'm going to kind of carve out a little more of this material so it's not filling up so much of my little loop. So I'm just using this little burr to get down into the corners, kind of squaring that little channel up and removing some of the bulk of that material. So you can see here, I've just filed some of that away. It's going to create more room for my flat wire and loop and hopefully make this chain move a little bit more fluidly. And parallel jaw pliers work great for this task. You don't want to leave a lot of tool marks on your links, and so I'm able to push the direction that I need with these parallel jaw pliers. All right, so I've got the loop down. Let's see how this fits together. So that's feeling like it's moving better. It's a lot more flexible, and the link can move freely. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with the rest of my links. Use the burr to kind of carve that channel out a little bit more. And I mentioned this earlier, but it's important to mention again, you want to do as much finishing as possible on the links before they're connected. So make sure as you work, if you're getting any tool marks, file marks, whatever, make sure you file and sand and polish those marks out. The more the better as you work. It will be a lot easier to finish as you go rather than trying to do it after everything's connected. Okay, so I'm linking 2 more links together just the way I showed you before. Removing some of that bulk from the channel with a burr, cutting the wire down and just bending it in a loop around the adjoining link. And these parallel jaw pliers are really handy. Okay, so that's what my loop looks like. I'm going to join it to the next link. Got to open it up a little bit more. Slide that link in and then trim off the excess and close it down. And for my chain, I don't feel that soldering that loop on the back side is necessary, but you can if you'd like to. So it's just a little bit of a time and labor intensive process to connect all of these links. Just continue to check the fit and make sure that everything is remaining flexible and you have nice fluid motion as you connect each link. And if you don't, just go back in with the file or the burr and kind of clean up those areas that are getting hung up on each other. And this is just the way I decided to link this chain together. But you can get really creative with chain links, and you could connect this in a lot of different ways. You could solder 2 of them together, kind of back to back, and then connect them with regular old jump rings or some half round wire rings or something like that. You could get a little bit more creative with it. But chain making is just, it's a repetitive, monotonous, time-intensive project. It's not for everyone. It is something that I really enjoy, though. I'm okay with the repetition, I guess. I kind of find it a little bit meditative to repeat the same task over and over and just kind of get in the zone. But you can see I'm just repeating all the steps to connect each of these links together while making sure that each link moves freely. And so you'll just keep doing that until you've got all of your links connected. And then once you've got them all connected, you're ready to polish. And the safest way to do that is in a tumbler. But remember, you can get creative with the links. You can use them individually as little hinged elements or however you want. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Remember, you can always check out more at potterusa.com and on our YouTube channel.